What makes a person unforgettable? Is it their wisdom, their courage, or perhaps their ability to see what others cannot? Today, we explore a woman who embodies all these traits, a beacon of light in a time of darkness. On this episode of Decode Vale, we journey into the wilderness of Paran, where David, grieving the loss of his mentor Samuel, encounters Abigail, a woman whose wisdom and bravery saved lives and shaped the course of history. Her story is one of humility and divine purpose, offering lessons that resonate even today. As we delve into Abigail's story, ask yourself, how can wisdom turn the tide in moments of crisis? If you find this exploration meaningful, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Decode Vale. Let's unravel this tale together, one that challenges us to see beyond the surface and embrace a deeper spiritual understanding. Characters and background. Nabal was a man of means, but not of character. His name meant fool, and he lived up to it. Known for his harshness and arrogance, Nabal's reputation was as cold as the stone walls of his estate. He lacked the warmth of generosity, the wisdom of humility. His wealth shielded him, but it also blinded him. Nabal was a man who had everything yet possessed nothing of true value. He owned 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. His flocks dotted the hills of Carmel, a sign of his material success. But while his wealth was vast, his heart was small. When the time for hospitality came, a time when even the coldest hearts softened, Nabal chose to close his fists. His riches could not buy the kindness that he refused to give. Nabal's wealth was a fortress, one that kept others out and kept him locked in, alone, isolated, and ultimately, doomed. Then there was Abigail. She was Nabal's wife, but more than that, she was his opposite in every way. Where Nabal was harsh, she was gentle. Where he was foolish, she was wise. Abigail was a woman of beauty, but it was her insight that made her truly remarkable. She saw what others missed, understood what others could not grasp. In a world where women often went unnoticed, Abigail stood out, not because she sought attention, but because her wisdom demanded it. The Bible praises her as one of the great women of her time, likening her to Rachel and Esther. She was beautiful, yes, but it was her mind, her heart, that the scriptures honor. Abigail's story is one of action, of seeing the storm on the horizon and knowing just how to calm it. She was a woman who could balance strength with grace, wisdom with humility. In a time of crisis, Abigail did not falter. Instead, she rose, not just to meet the challenge but to surpass it. In doing so, she became unforgettable, an eternal figure of wisdom and courage. David's interaction with Nabal. David was a man on the run, a leader of men but not yet a king. He and his men roamed the wilderness, surviving on what they could gather. But in those days, there was a code, a rule of hospitality. It was the time of sheep shearing, a time of feasts and open hands. David had guarded Nabal's flocks in the wild, ensuring that no harm came to them. It was a fair expectation that Nabal would repay this kindness with provisions, bread, water, and meat for David's hungry men. So, David sent his young men to Nabal, not demanding, but requesting, as was the custom. They came in peace, with words of respect, hoping to receive what was due in return for their protection. But Nabal was not a man of respect. He was a man of wealth, and in his wealth, he saw no need for humility. When David's men arrived, Nabal didn't just refuse them, he insulted them. "Who is David?" he scoffed. "Who is this son of Jesse?" As if David were a nameless, wandering rogue, not the man whose name was already known across the land. Nabal dismissed David as a mere servant, one who had broken away from his master. He mocked the very idea that he should give his bread, his water, his meat, to men he considered nothing. Nabal's words were sharp, cutting deeper than any sword, and they reached David like a slap in the face. David was not a man to be trifled with. He had been patient with Saul, the king who hunted him. But this insult from Nabal, this was different. It was personal. David's blood boiled. He did not hesitate, he did not pause to reflect. He strapped on his sword and called for his men. 400 of them armed themselves for battle. They would march to Nabal's house and leave nothing behind. David was ready to destroy everything Nabal had, his men, his livestock, his very legacy. In that moment, David was not the patient shepherd boy who had once sung songs of peace. He was a warrior, wronged and ready to exact vengeance. The insult had stirred something deep within him, something that demanded satisfaction. And so, they marched, the anger of one man fueling the resolve of 400. It was a march that could end in blood, a march toward a man who did not yet know the danger that was coming for him. Abigail's intervention. The servants knew what Nabal did not. They had seen David's men in the wilderness, and they knew their strength. When word of Nabal's insult reached them, one servant, wiser than his master, hurried to Abigail. He spoke quickly, the urgency clear in his voice. "Disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household," he warned. He described David's men as a wall of protection around them, night and day. But now, that wall had become a sword, and it was pointed straight at them. The servant didn't waste words. He knew what had to be done. Abigail must act, and she must act now, for there was no time to lose. Abigail didn't hesitate. She didn't stop to consult her foolish husband. There was no time for that. She moved quickly, gathering provisions, bread, wine, sheep, roasted grain, raisins, figs, enough to feed an army. She loaded everything onto donkeys and set out to meet David. She did this without a word to Nabal, understanding that his pride would only bring ruin. Abigail was a woman of action, and she understood the gravity of the moment. She knew that what she did now could save lives, or doom them. And so, with wisdom guiding her and courage in her heart, she rode out to face the wrath of David. When Abigail saw David, she didn't wait for him to speak. She hurried down from her donkey, fell at his feet, and bowed low to the ground. She took the blame upon herself, though she was blameless. "My lord," she said, "let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak to you." She addressed him with the utmost respect, acknowledging his position and the future that awaited him. Abigail was no fool, she knew the power of words, spoken with humility. In that moment, she wasn't just pleading for her household, she was guiding David away from a path of destruction. Abigail spoke with the wisdom of someone who saw the bigger picture. She reminded David of who he was and what he was destined to become. "The Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my lord, because you fight the Lord's battles," she said. "Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live." Abigail knew that vengeance belonged to God, not to men. She advised David to let go of his anger, to avoid shedding blood that would bring regret later. She reminded him of the promises God had made to him, promises that were too great to be jeopardized by the impulsive actions of the moment. Abigail's words were like water on a fire, cooling the rage that had consumed David. She was wise, not just in her words, but in her understanding of the man before her. And it was that wisdom that would save them all. David's response. David stood before Abigail, his sword still at his side, his heart still heavy with anger. But her words had cut through the rage. They reminded him of who he was, of what he was meant to be. He looked at this woman before him, a woman of grace and wisdom, and he saw the truth in her plea. David realized he had been on the brink of a grave mistake, one that could have stained his future. Slowly, the fire in his eyes dimmed. "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me," he said. He saw the hand of God in her actions, recognizing that Abigail was more than just a woman trying to save her household. She was a messenger, sent to prevent him from bringing blood upon his own hands. David's heart softened as he listened to Abigail. He knew she was right. "May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day," he told her. David accepted the provisions she brought, but more importantly, he accepted her counsel. He realized that vengeance was not his to take, that his anger had almost led him down a dark path. Abigail had shown him a better way, a way of restraint, of leaving judgment in God's hands. "Go home in peace," David said to her. "I have heard your words and granted your request." In that moment, David chose wisdom over wrath, mercy over vengeance. He turned back from the edge, guided by the words of a woman whose wisdom had saved them all. Nabal's fate. While Abigail was out saving his life, Nabal remained blissfully unaware. He feasted like a king, drunk and oblivious, celebrating his wealth with a heart as cold as stone. The danger that loomed over him never crossed his mind. He didn't know how close he had come to losing everything, didn't know that his wife's wisdom had turned away the sword that was meant for him. Nabal was a man who lived in ignorance, believing his wealth could shield him from the world's dangers. He had no idea that his arrogance had nearly cost him his life. The next morning, when the wine had left him, Abigail told Nabal what had happened, how close he had come to death, how his foolishness had nearly brought ruin upon them all. The truth hit him like a hammer. Nabal's heart failed within him. He became like stone, paralyzed by the weight of his own folly. 10 days later, he was dead. It wasn't David who took his life, it was God's judgment. David had been right to leave vengeance in the Lord's hands. Nabal's end was not by the sword, but by the hand of God, who dealt with him as only God could. In the end, Nabal's wealth, his power, meant nothing. He was a man brought low by his own arrogance, judged by the same God who had sent Abigail to save him. After Nabal's death, David didn't forget the woman who had saved him from his own anger. He recognized in Abigail a kindred spirit, someone with wisdom, courage, and grace. David sent word to her, asking her to become his wife. It wasn't just a proposal, it was recognition of her value, her strength, and her place by his side. Abigail accepted. She became more than the widow of a fool, she became the wife of a future king. David's choice was not just about love or loyalty, it was about recognizing the worth of a woman who had proven herself in the face of danger and judgment. Abigail's story is more than just a tale of a wise woman. It's a lesson in humility, in the power of a calm voice in the midst of chaos. It's about seeing beyond the moment, understanding that wisdom often lies in restraint, in letting go of vengeance and trusting in a higher power. Abigail teaches us that true strength is not in the sword but in the heart that knows when to act and when to wait. She reminds us that the right words at the right time can save lives and change the course of history. What lessons from Abigail's story speak to you? How do you find strength in wisdom? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Join us at Decode Vale as we continue to explore the timeless stories that shape our faith and our lives. In a world full of Nabals, be an Abigail. Seek wisdom, practice humility, and trust in the power of a kind word. Let Abigail's story inspire you to live with grace, to act with courage, and to trust that sometimes, the greatest battles are won not with might, but with wisdom.